So this is what we're going to cover today. Welcome to our second thesis workshop. To introduce who is here today, Dr. John Hakala is our Associate Dean in the Graduate School, and I am Robin Olnizak. I'm Director of Student Records. And so we are both involved in, checking out, working with you on your thesis submission and then kind of graduation processes. So I will also introduce Jeanette Finch. She is she works in our library, and she is here to kind of maybe be a point of contact if you have any copyright questions. John and I are not copyright lawyers, so we are going to defer to her if you have any very specific questions about copyright and how that works with your thesis. All right, so I will start. I will let Dr. Hakala kick it off with this first slide.
So I better unmute myself first. Yeah. Okay. So when you're putting together a thesis is a capstone project, but it's more than just a capstone project. It represents it's a book that's being published on behalf of you and of the institution. And so once this is published, it's a permanent record. It's sitting out there. A lot of people end up having their theses referenced, years later. They can be accessed through the internet, and there are archives that are aware of theses. And so you want this thing to represent you in the best possible way that it can. So of course, your committee and your mentor are helping you produce the most logical, coherent argument that you can to support your thesis statement. And on the back end, we're trying to help you make sure that what you end up submitting is something that will also look nice and also represent the college well. So a lot of this is handled through, we do our submissions through ProQuest. And ProQuest is it's a website and an organization that helps establish sorts of rules that go along with the submissions of theses, and to make sure that everything is archived similarly. And so there are sort of rules and structures that go with the ProQuest site, and then there are rules and structures that go with the College of Charleston site. But again, our goal out of all of this is to help you produce the best possible thesis we can. You don't want, and I've known people who this has happened to, you don't want to finish your thesis and publish it, and then years later, you're looking through it and you find all these typos on all these pages and know that this thing has been out there for other people to look at for years. That would be really embarrassing. So we're just trying to help you produce the best possible product that we can.
Yeah, hopefully everyone's got spell check by now. So very basic steps in how to start preparing for your thesis. So a lot of this is kind of pre-registration, but obviously you need to identify a thesis advisor and constitute a committee. Depending on your program, there are kind of different structures and different requirements, even deadlines around how you do that. And so the graduate school doesn't dictate how those are happening. We defer to the program to set their own requirements for, how to compose your committee, how you present a proposal, whether or not there's an actual oral defense, or if it's, a submission and then informal approval from your committee. But the last step in that process is actually filling out the registration paperwork to get enrolled in your thesis credits. And so just like everything else in your graduate career, there's a form for that. It is on the graduate school's website under current students, and we have a forms page, and it is called the individual enrollment form. And so that is where you get a handful of signatures from your thesis advisor, from your program director. Usually the program or you as the enrollee provides a copy of your proposal as documentation that you have been vetted by your program and by your committee, and that you have permission to enroll. So this is something, depending on how you enroll in your thesis credits or how many hours are required by your program. Some programs require 6 hours of thesis, some require 4. if you're breaking that up incrementally, most students typically enroll in 3 hours one semester and 3 hours in a subsequent semester. You're responsible for generating the paperwork for the second enrollment. So there's not an automatic enrollment in the second half of your thesis. That's just another form you got to fill out. So save a copy for yourself. And if feel free to drop any questions in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end, or Haley might be able to easily get them in real time. But yeah, feel free to stop us at any point if you have specific questions. So once you enroll in your thesis credits, you are required to maintain continuous enrollment until you graduate, till you finish. And so that means that, you're entitled to College of Charleston resources, including faculty, library access, lab access, certainly all of the basic things. But essentially, if you're not done with your thesis after those 6 hours of enrollment or 4 hours of enrollment, you must maintain continuous enrollment. And that is usually done with a 1 credit continuous enrollment hour, which is usually a 900 credit. So, if you want, you're welcome to enroll in another class. And, if you need that to bolster some knowledge in a specific area or an independent study or something like that, that's also acceptable. You just have to be actively enrolled. And some students will enroll in up to 3 credits, depending on if they might have FAFSA or loans that, 3 hours kind of triggers part-time enrollment for those purposes. But generally, students are going to opt for the lowest, the minimum, which is 1 hour, since you're paying for these enrollments. This is, a regular registration hour that carries tuition and fees, but these hours cannot be used to fulfill degree requirements. So you can't enroll in 3 hours of thesis and then stock up on 900 credits. You have to, fulfill the required hours of your thesis, and then start enrolling in 900s as you work towards the finish line. There's another form for that. It's also on our forms page, and it's called Continuous Research Enrollment Form. So, grading. If since this is a multi-term endeavor, and it's really not done until it's done, until you've successfully defended at the very end, what you'll see on your thesis enrollment, either in DegreeWorks or an unofficial transcript, is an IP, so an in-progress placeholder that is attached to the first half of your thesis enrollment. And so you won't get a final grade, until the very end, until you've successfully or unsuccessfully defended. Nobody will unsuccessfully defend. And, depending on your program, depending on the enrollment, some of those are graded, some of those thesis enrollments are graded pass-fail. They're US, which is unsatisfactory, satisfactory, or an actual letter grade. And so that the final grade will not be there until the very end. So don't get alarmed if you see that IP designation in your DegreeWorks or on an unofficial transcript. And that is something that I do kind of on the back end with the registrar, is I work with them to make sure the IPs get on all the right enrollments. But then, just so you're aware, as you're working through the graduation process and kind of the degree requirement checkout, we got to make sure that those IPs get replaced by whatever the final grade is. And so that sometimes takes an extra ping to your thesis advisor, because they will have to go back and submit a little electronic form to make sure that your final grade gets entered into the system, because we can't post your degree until all grades are there. So the thesis manual. So this is the document that is maintained by the graduate school, and it dictates all the formatting and kind of the copy editing nuances that apply to all of you. So you're all in different disciplines, you're all in different fields, but there are universal formatting requirements that we dictate from the graduate school. But, since you're all in different fields and disciplines, that's going to dictate your citation style. So we don't require a citation style. Certainly you must have one. But, depending on your field, that's going to be different for each of you. So I'll let, hopefully you guys got the handout of the kind of the greatest hits of common thesis errors that we see. And I'll let Dr. Hakala talk a little bit about what some of those are. But yeah, review that handout, because those are easy things to avoid and save yourself some trouble.
Yeah, actually, the handout is compiled from many years of copy editing the theses, which is one thing. I'll be one of the last people you hear from going out the door because I'll be copy editing each of your theses. And over the years, there are some corrections that I make so many times that I just started compiling them into a sheet. And if you look through the sheet, you'll realize that most of those things are indicated in the thesis manual. So in other words, the thesis manual tells you that you can't have more than one title page, or you've got to have an abstract page that fits all on one page, or there's a variety of common mistakes that are made. So this tries to outline what a lot of those are. Usually when you submit, everybody makes mistakes, everybody's got typos, and part of my job is to try to help you find the typos. So usually what happens is once you submit, I will send you an email through ProQuest that'll have those corrections on there. And you may recognize some of these very same formatting mistakes, but don't expect the thesis to be completely correct the first time. I think I can only remember one or two instances of that over the years. The standard number of times that a thesis has to be resubmitted is about 2 or 3.
Yeah.
We usually try to catch everything on the second time, but occasionally there's a glitch. But if you look at those things in the thesis manual, it identifies what a lot of them are.
Yeah.
One thing that I do want to point out, there are some of you that are in either marine biology or environmental studies who will be, the program requirements are to submit to have 2 papers published or have 2 papers ready for submission that belong to the thesis. So in addition, the graduate school, since this is a book, since you're producing a book, the graduate school requires that you bind these 2 together with an introduction and a conclusion. And that can be really simple. It can be a paragraph on both ends. It can be a paragraph that says, these 2 papers bind the common theme of such and so. And then the conclusion says, here's what I learned from binding these 2 things together that made me into a better marine biologist or something. So other than that, follow the thesis guidelines. If you have questions, you're always free to ask myself or Robin. We would be happy to, and we often will, jump in and let people know ahead of time things that we see that can make it simpler for them to submit. So.
Yeah, so there are some verbatim exactly things that you should copy as they are in the thesis manual, like the title page and the abstract, because those are formatted very specifically. And, we will kick it back to you if it's not correct. So, take a fun Friday night, read the thesis manual. It's really only about 10 pages of content, and it's got, the most important things in there that we're certainly looking for when you submit it and going through the graduation and checkout processes. So.
And one thing you might want to keep in mind also is that when you submit, in addition to what you have in your PDF version of your thesis, there's also an abstract that goes on the ProQuest website. And because it's a web-based abstract, it's written in HTML. So if you have a thesis that has something written in italics, or it's got some scientific formula or something like that that's not in traditional, your Roman lettering in the same font as everything else, then you'll need to familiarize yourself. I mean, it can be in the title of the thesis also. And you'll just need to make sure that you get those corrected. Don't worry if you forget to do that. I'll ping you and try and help you walk through it. But just know up front that that's one of the issues.
Yeah. Okay. So you're on track to defend. You are ready to go. You're on track. And so you need to apply for graduation. So you must be enrolled in the term in which you graduate. So if you are working through 900 credits or your thesis credits, you've got to be enrolled in that final semester. So if if you're working through 900 credits continuous enrollment hours, you're not required to be enrolled in the summer unless that's the term you plan to graduate. So there is a thesis submission deadline that is dictated by the graduate school, and that will always be the last day of class in that semester. For summer graduates, that would be the last day of class of the last summer term. So we kind of treat summer as one term as opposed to all the different little terms that are in summer. So because we are the last deadline, the last stop, sometimes your programs will set earlier deadlines and use our submission deadline as the way to kind of set their own deadlines, like defense deadlines, or when your committee needs kind of your final thesis after, you know, edits have been made. And so use our deadline to kind of backtrack and, you know, retroactively set your own deadlines, because we're the last stop. So certainly you must have defended, you must have kind of received approval from your committee prior to submitting. You know, you should not be submitting a draft version to us. We are the last stop. And so make sure that you are using that date, that last day of class, to kind of plan out your semester, plan out your kind of timeline for finishing. So as Dr. Hackala already mentioned, ProQuest is the platform that we use to submit. It's an electronic database. It's available through the library. It's searchable. It is where your thesis goes to live. Sadly, we don't bind and print them anymore. No hard copies, even though there's probably some old dusty ones in the library that you could find if you want to look. But yes, you must upload it as a PDF. So if you're working in a Word document, if you're working with a lot of graphs or things, know that you have to convert those into a PDF, and, you know, be aware of formatting. You know, a lot of times things can get lost when you're converting formats and file types. So be aware that it's got to go up as a PDF. Yeah, and as Dr. Hackala said, you know, be aware that the abstract portion that goes into ProQuest is going to need HTML coding if you've got italics in there or anything that is subscript or superscript. So you will have to kind of, you don't have to teach yourself coding. You don't have to take a whole online class, but be aware that that's usually a common copy editing mistake, is that students leave out the HTML code. And the most basic coding is in the thesis manual. So italics, bold, superscript, subscript, all that is already in there. You just gotta remember to put it up there. And when you're submitting to ProQuest, make sure that you use your CFC email address, because as Dr. Hackala said, it is not common for students to have a perfectly clean thesis submission on the first attempt. So there will be a handful of kind of copy editing rounds as we clean it up and make sure that it's ready for final submission. And so usually students think, oh my God, I submitted, I'm done. I will never think about this ever again. But you usually will have an email or two with a few requests to make some copy editing changes. And so certainly tune into your CFC email, because sometimes when students use their personal email, they're not mentally associating it with kind of their schoolwork and their graduation requirements. And so we see students kind of submit and then forget about it, and take a lot of reminders from us that, no, you still got to make a few changes, because that, you know, you cannot graduate until your thesis is approved by the graduate school. And so that is a degree requirement. So you can't kind of submit and then walk away. You got to kind of be diligent right at the end, even though you've worked so hard, and it will probably be a great relief to submit. There's still a few more baby steps to get to the very end. And so, yes, as Dr. Hackala said, we don't usually see a perfectly clean one on the first attempt. So yeah, just be aware that there might be one or two tries until you get an approved thumbs up version email from us from ProQuest. So you've submitted to ProQuest. You are done, mostly. But here are two more pieces of paper that we require as part of kind of the graduation thesis checkout process. And so one is the thesis title page with signatures and the thesis release form. So the thesis release form kind of tracks when you defended, when it was released to you to make any edits, and then when it was accepted as like a final approved version by your advisor and your committee. And so that piece of paper comes to me in the graduate school, and then the title page. So there's a version of the title page that is electronic, that does not have signatures. It simply lists the name, types out the names. That is kind of the front piece of your thesis. That's the electronic version that goes into ProQuest, but then there is a piece of paper that comes to us. And so that does have lines on it with signatures. And so there's an example of both of those types of title pages in the thesis manual. So just be aware that that is a thing that you also have to work on. So obviously we're not doing a lot of in-person defenses, in-person meetings. Most everything is happening virtually this year or electronically. And so we are accepting electronic signatures on that title page, but please, encourage, make sure your committee is using the fun scrawly ones as opposed to kind of the Adobe timestamp logo ones, because, this is the fancy piece of paper that we attach to your file and we keep it for the record. And so we want to make sure that, those signatures resemble the real signatures to the best of our electronic abilities. Make sure that you get your degree program correct and your program name correct. I see students get very creative about what type of program they're in. So just be aware that, you got to list out your full, Master of Science, Master of Arts, History and Creative Writing, Master of Fine Arts. So just, make sure that you get those little things right, because as I said, if they're wrong, I'm going to kick it back to you and ask you to redo it. So save yourself the trouble. There is a date listed also on the title page, and that date should match your graduation term. So it's not an actual like calendar date like August 5th. It's August 2020. So that example is in the thesis manual, but that date should match your graduation term. It shouldn't be when you defended your thesis. It shouldn't be when you got it back from your committee. It should be your graduation term. And if you have questions about that, you can ask me and I will advise you. The graduate dean is technically a member of your committee, so make sure that you list that person at the very bottom, at the very end of your list of actual committee members, because that is kind of the final signature that comes from our office as kind of a final certification of a thesis approval. So again, make sure that you are following to a T the examples that are listed in the thesis manual, because it's all there. And the thesis release form is also on our forms page, but it's also the last page of the thesis manual. So a few places to find it. So the fun things, you are working on this major academic endeavor that's, the big piece, the big chunk of your degree. And so as you're doing that, we have money that is available to you. If you're off to present, if you need research supplies, if you want to attend a conference for networking, all of that stuff can be funded from us in the graduate school. We provide little mini grants for those kinds of things. And I know that most conferences aren't happening, but most have done a good job of transitioning to a virtual format and hopefully reduce their registration fees. But that while you're working on your thesis, these are perfect things to ask for money to do. So please ask us for money. And then I'll let Dr. Hakala talk about the other fun things that we do around research and theses.
So we have several different types of competitions that we use to help let the rest of the world know the great work that all of you are doing. And some of these things are, they're helpful to you both in terms of learning how to present your work better, but some of them also, these are going to be things that in the future you may be judged professionally on, depending which field you go into and what sort of career path you follow. So the 3-minute thesis, we just finished this last week, and we haven't announced the formal winners yet, right? But
I don't think so, yeah.
Yeah,
but we have participation.
It was completely online this time, which was a little bit of a challenge, but I thought that the competitors did really, really well. And as you may have seen in the chat coming in, we have 3 different awards that we give: a first place, a runner-up, and People's Choice. And the People's Choice winner was Haley Shane, who's on this.
Shawnee.
What?
Shawnee. Her last name's Shawnee. Right? Did I?
Shawnee. Oh, I'm sorry. So the winner of this competition, in addition to getting cash, all 3 of these get cash, but the winner has their presentation go on to the regional competition at the Conference of Southern Graduate Schools meeting in February. And the neat thing about this is an elevator speech to teach you how to present your own work in a very short format. You run into somebody, you want to describe what it is you do to a layman, and so this gives you practice of doing that. You've got 3 minutes and a static slide to to make your presentation. I believe we just sent out, there's an email that's got the videos of all the competitors who competed in this last 3-minute thesis. But for those of you who didn't participate or are interested, we would love to have you compete next year. The graduate poster session is for projects that are a little further on. This is usually for people that are getting close to completing their thesis. They have results. It's a standard poster session where you present on a poster. You have time to talk to judges and to people who come by the poster. So it's not just static. You can be an active participant in the presentation with questions and answers. We do that in the spring semester, and that is, you're usually judged against people who have posters that are in your field as well, or similar fields. And again, there are cash prizes. And then finally, we have the Master's Thesis Award, which we give. This is after you're out, after you finish the thesis. We have committees of faculty who go back, read the theses, and the Conference of Southern Graduate Schools has a process by which every 2 years, theses in certain categories are allowed to compete for a cash prize at the regional level. And this year we have, there's a non-traditional thesis category, which works well for those of you that are doing MFAs or CPAD theses. But otherwise we have traditional fields, science, mathematical sciences, physical sciences. We have another biological sciences. We have another category that's education and social sciences. And then we have another one, humanities and fine arts is the other one. And we should be announcing the winners of that pretty soon. They go to the regional competition. Last year, a C of C submission for the Thesis Award finished second in the regional competition. In other words, somebody here who's doing what you're doing now wrote their thesis. They were selected as the second best master's thesis in the entire southern region of the United States. So this is up against students who went to schools like, the North Carolina schools, the Georgia schools, Texas schools, LSU, Tennessee, and we had somebody finish second. So this is something that, we are happy to advertise your work, and we want to advertise your work, and we are rooting for you to do a great job learning to present your thesis, learning to do your research. And we want to just let you know that we're here to support you in those endeavors.
Yeah, and so that's kind of it. So again, Dr. Hackle and I are kind of your contacts in the graduate school if you have specific questions about timeline or how to move through the final steps. As I mentioned, Jeanette Finch is a point person in the library if you have specific questions about copyright. And then certainly we're not content experts, so your thesis advisor and your program director are also certainly good points of contact. There's Jeanette.
And Jeanette is here, then Jeanette can speak to that issue of copyright.
Yeah, so now I will stop sharing, and if anyone had any specific or good questions or wanted to, now's your chance. I know that's a lot of information. It's a lot of kind of details, even as you're working on this big thing. Try to get out the door and on to the next thing in your life. But yeah, we're here. Does anyone want to ask a question or have a specific question?
Or Jeanette, did you want to say something about copyright issues? Or
yeah,
there are some good guidelines, and I'm not a copyright lawyer either, and I think you kind of have to be that to have perfected it, but I can definitely give you guidance on proper attribution and on what you might want to check if you're having to use a line of code or a performance piece from someone else, or for your own data. If you're working with a data bank and somebody else wants to use that in the future, there are some things that you might want to consider.
Yeah, we want to make sure that you're attributing correctly, that you're not stealing from anyone, that no one's stealing from you. And so, want to make sure that if you have any questions, certainly ask, and we will try to figure it out for you. Is there anything else? Maybe one thing that I forgot is that submitting to ProQuest is totally free. I mean, if you want, ProQuest we don't require